This is the Voice of Motown podcast. I'm Tyler Pepe.
And I'm Brandon Cork, and this is a WVU sports podcast by two suffering WVU fans.
All right, the West Virginia Mountaineers take on the Baylor Bears on Thursday night in Morgantown. This is the first Thursday night home game in the Neil Brown era, so I'm pretty excited about that because it feels like it's just been too long since we've had a home Thursday night game. And the last time, I had to go back and look this up, the last time WVU played a Thursday night home game was October 25th, 2018 against
Baylor?
Yeah, the Baylor Bears. And the Mountaineers walked away with a 44-point win that night. So we're hoping West Virginia can emerge victorious Thursday. What are your thoughts on the game?
I'm not super optimistic right now, being how the teams kind of looked against solid competition so far. So I guess we're going to see. I mean, Baylor hasn't been bad. The Big 12 is tough this year. So this is going to be a really good barometer to kind of see where WVU stands. Because, I mean, Kansas has had a great season. We lost to them. Texas, we'll get into a little bit, just blew out Oklahoma. And, they've been up and down, but they beat us pretty handily. Are we going to be able to show up against a quality opponent this year? I don't know. But there's not very many gimmies on the schedule, if any. So this game is a tough one.
Yeah, which leads me to this one. You never want to put too much emphasis on one single game. But is this a must win? Here's why I ask. If WVU and Neil Brown can get a win on Thursday versus Baylor, he can silence the critics for the time being. He can get the fans to buy back in. And Coach Brown can finally notch a signature win on his resume, because I can't really think of one single one up to this point. I guess if you want to count the Liberty Bowl win over Army. But additionally, look at the rest of the schedule. Teams who we once thought would be easy wins are now very scary teams for us. Coming into this season, I'm sure most people thought playing TCU in Morgantown would be an easy game. Not
Guilty.
Anymore. Yeah, they're undefeated, looking like conference champ contenders. Kansas State looks like a tough matchup for us because WVU historically has trouble against running quarterbacks. Texas Tech is a tough team this year. Sure, Oklahoma and Iowa State look like somewhat winnable games at this point, but you still have to play Big 12 heavyweights like Oklahoma State on this schedule. So the Mountaineers are currently 2-3, and they need to find 4 more wins on this schedule. When you break it down, this home game against Baylor probably needs to be a victory if West Virginia wants to reach 6 wins this season. So what are your thoughts on if this is a must-win game or not?
I feel like we've been asking that question. Is this a must-win game for the past few weeks now? And honestly, I feel like it's more of, an analogy for how Neil Brown's tenure has gone. At least for this year, it feels like the Virginia Tech, that was a must-win game and he won it. And then looking back, Virginia Tech wasn't very good. The Texas game felt like a must-win game because Texas was floundering, and that was, something that could really show that he's turned the program around, especially after that Kansas loss. And we realized that Virginia Tech just wasn't a very good football team. Now we're going into Baylor, and, must-win home game, and Baylor might be the third worst team left on our schedule. So, I mean, we need to win this if we do want to get to 6 wins, because if we want to get to 6 wins, the 6 wins are going to have to be probably Baylor, Texas Tech, Iowa State, and us pulling an upset off somewhere. So is it a must win? I think every game going into it, if Neil Brown wants to keep his job for another year, has to be a must win, because at this point now, I mean, we're just kind of doing the same thing over and over and over again and not really seeing signs of improvement. And in the fans' eyes, I think every game that Neil Brown can win or be competitive in or show some signs of life are crucial for him if he wants to continue, not only being at WVU, but for any future, coaching gigs. I mean, as offensive coordinator, he wasn't great. So he's going to hire him as an offensive coordinator if he gets fired here. And at head coaching, I mean, he's going to have to probably go to a much smaller school who's willing to give him a second shot and think that WVU was just a fluke, because he's kind of shown that he's not very good at that either. So I know that really doesn't answer your question, but that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. Neil just needs to win, regardless of who the opponent is. He needs to figure out a way to win, because right now it's going to be hard to get to 6 wins.
Yeah, I'm with you 100%. And plus, I mean, it's a home game. You can't expect to win a ton of games on the road when you're struggling to win, period. And so you got to snatch up some home victories and really get momentum on your side, which kind of segues into our next segment is what should the expectations be at WVU? Because some fans are calling for Neil Brown to be fired. Others say he hasn't had enough time due to COVID, the cupboard being bare, NIL deals, tough schedule, et cetera, et cetera. Which begs the question, what are our expectations for WVU and a head coach being here? So I'll let you go first. What do you expect a head coach to accomplish while they're here?
I think, if we're looking at a larger sample size, like if someone's going to be at WVU for say 10 years, I would like to see them average like somewhere in the realm of like 7.7 wins a season. I mean, because that gets you some 8-win season, 9-win season. That gives them the opportunity to also lose when, you just don't have the guys. You lose some of your best players because you can't hit 100% of the time recruiting. So no, that gives you the opportunity to have 5 seasons. I think any WVU fan that comes out and says we expect to win 10 wins every year is ridiculous. I also think it's ridiculous for WVU fans to say, I'm okay with 5 or 6 wins, because historically, I think we talked about it last week when we talk about, and we also tweeted it out about Neil Brown's winning percentage and how low it is compared to, some of the coaches. And the last time WVU fired a coach was at the end of the 70s. I mean, that just goes to show how stable this program has been. I mean, Nealon was great. Rich Rod was great. Bill Stewart went 9-3 3 seasons in a row. Dana had his ups and downs, but his ups, he got us to a 10-win season, and he did have a few downs, but that happens with the way that he handles his program. And Neil Brown has honestly been the worst coach, or the worst coach on paper, since Cignetti. So, I mean, what is that? Almost 50 years? That's kind of goes to show you how stable WVU can be as a program with the right leadership.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think any of that is unreasonable. I mean, Dana had one losing season in that tenure that he had. I mean, sure, he had a few 7-win seasons, which felt pretty disappointing, but only one losing season. Whereas Neil Brown, up to this point, has one winning season. And it was on a COVID year where they didn't have to play Oklahoma and, games that we honestly probably wouldn't have come out victorious in. So it's basically what we've expected from our head coaches for the past, like you said, 20, 40 years. And so what now we've all of a sudden lowered expectations. I just don't understand some of these fans out here who keep just trying to reach for any excuse possible. We chased Dana out of town because he thought he was worth more money. And WVU and the Mountaineer fans said, hey, you've had some good seasons, but we expect more. That's essentially why Dana left, is because, I mean, he was okay, but it seemed like we hit our ceiling with him. So he went to Houston, and we looked for a head coach to get us over that thump. And now I've heard all the excuses for Neil Brown, and some are legit. I mean, the first year we heard the cupboard was bare, and so we gave him a pass that first year. Second year, we heard COVID slowed down his progress, so we gave him a pass. And he did have a winning record and sneaked out a bowl win, so we were starting to see some progress. But then year 3, we just weren't a good football team, plain and simple. They barely made a bowl game. They looked terrible in it. And WVU finished with a losing record. Now we're in year 4, which a lot of fans had high expectations compared to the previous 3 years. We finally got a bona fide quarterback. The offense can finally score. I mean, I only predicted 7 wins, and I was pretty happy with that. And it looks like that's probably not going to happen. So the excuses just don't apply anymore to me. He has his players. He has his coaches. It's time to start seeing results.
Oh, for sure. And, I think part of the reason why I think Neil gets such a longer runway than most people normally would is just because the way that Dana rubbed people. He wasn't embracing tradition. He wasn't embracing, the former players. he was an abrasive personality. He wasn't super charismatic. He just kind of went, did his job, went home, and that was that. He was very blunt and to the point. And Neil, has that kind of Southern charm to him. He kind of, speaks in, more friendly ways to the media than others do. And, he kind of knows how to talk the talk. But, that's all well and good. And that worked for Bill Stewart. But Bill Stewart also had 9 wins a season for those 3 years. Neil Brown hasn't done that. I mean, you can be the nicest guy on the planet Earth, but if you can't win, then, good for you. You're nice, but you can't be a football coach. Like, go sell used cars or something. I don't know. But it just, it's kind of the difference. And I think he does get that longer runway because people just didn't like Dana, and they really want this guy to work out. But, newsflash, there are so many other coaches out there that, would be happy to be at WVU. I mean, there's rumors out there that Hugh Freeze wants the WVU job. He's already contacted people saying, if that job opens up, WVU, get back to the Power Five. There's guys like Kurt Signetti and James Madison, who has WVU connections, head coach, last coach who got hired, but he's won everywhere. And then you have guys like Tony Gibson, who has been here a long time, and he's doing a great job as defensive coordinator at NC State. Every year for the past few seasons, they've had one of the best defenses in the country, every year. So there's a lot of options out there, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. I'm sure there's another 7 or 10 names out there that would be more than willing to come to WVU and hear us out. And I'm sure that they can speak just as well and be just as nice as Neil Brown, but the products on the field would probably be improved too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't feel like any of this is a knee-jerk reaction either, like some people are claiming. Like, people who are calling for a coaching change at Oklahoma, that's knee-jerk reaction. Like, that's not being fair. But year 4 and no progress really being shown, I feel like that's more than fair. But, we've talked about this stuff in the past, so we'll see what we do on Thursday. Maybe, once again, Neil Brown and WVU can silence his critics for a little bit. So we wanted to update you guys on just the Big 12 conference in general, because it was a fun weekend for the Big 12. I tried watching just about every Big 12 game I could, because every game was just exciting. We'll start off with TCU stays undefeated by beating Kansas 38-31. And this was a fun football game, back and forth the entire time. And credit to Kansas, who lost Jalen Daniels late in the second quarter, but backup Jason Bean tossed 4 second-half touchdowns and kept the Jayhawks in the game all the way down the stretch. But meanwhile, TCU seems to be for real. They are 5-0, and Sonny Dykes has this team just firing on all cylinders. It seems like they have a big showdown versus Oklahoma State this Saturday. And that's the battle for the last 2 undefeated Big 12 teams. So that was a fun game to watch. Gave Kansas their first loss. But to me, that proved that TCU is going to be a big-time contender in the Big 12 this year.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I mean, they have such a really good, group of offensive guys. Max Duggan was a guy who, last year I thought was kind of held back by whatever they were trying to do offensively. And Quentin Johnston is a freak. I mean, he's huge. He's athletic. He had over 200 yards in the touchdown against Kansas. And, I think the 2 coaches who took over there, Sonny Dykes, like you said, and Lance Leipold at Kansas, have done such a phenomenal job. And, not to kind of go back into the Neil Brown, what the expectation should be topic, but I mean, I think guys like that have kind of shifted the perspective of what we should expect with coaches and how quickly they can turn them around, because, Kansas, year 2 for Lance Leipold, and, they're already doubled their win total. They're ranked. They're legit, and people are taking them seriously. Sonny Dykes, year 1, taking over from a legendary head coach, Gary Patterson, and starting off 5-0. Now we'll see if it can sustain. But I mean, even Sonny Dykes was kind of a retread. He coached at Cal and was not very good there, but it works out. So I mean, I feel happy for these 2 programs, because these aren't 2 of the programs that I hope end up at the bottom of the standings. That would be Texas and Oklahoma. But I'm happy for these programs and seeing they're going in the right direction. And it gives me hope for WVU, because Kansas isn't a football school, And TCU, while they're in a big metro area, they're kind of the little brother to, Texas and even Baylor in some ways. So, good for them. And, I love rooting for the underdog. It'd be great to see one of those two teams take the conference championship because, it's fun to root for the little guy.
I'm with you. Yeah. And I feel like the Big 12 just needs some new blood to emerge. I know Baylor, won last year and they're not always up at the top, but I'm with you. It's fun to see new teams emerging from the conference. But you brought up Texas and Oklahoma. Let's talk about that real quick. Texas absolutely demolishes Oklahoma 49-0. And Oklahoma is officially in a rebuilding year. They lost to Kansas State and TCU to start conference play. And then they get destroyed by the Longhorns. They are at the bottom of the Big 12, along with Iowa State at 0-3 for their conference record. Meanwhile, Texas seems to be on the rise after losing to Texas Tech. They have now blown out Big 12 teams in back-to-back weeks. So what do you think of Texas ascending while Oklahoma is having a very uncommonly bad year for them?
Yeah, on the Texas front, I feel like that Texas Tech game really woke them up. I wasn't sure if it would just because of how Texas is. I mean, as a program normally. They also got Quinn Ewers back, and he was great as expected. That's big for them. And, who knows? I mean, they could end up being, what they only have 2 losses. So, they could still vie for a conference championship game. But then again, they could also kind of regress into old ways. It's hard to tell with Texas, talent-wise, especially on the offensive side of the ball with Ewers, Robinson, and Worthy. That's probably one of the best trios in the Big 12. But it's about consistency. And some of these other teams in the conference who are ahead of them in the standings seem to be more consistent. So I think Texas is a good football team, but are they consistent? I'm still not sure on that. On Oklahoma, I think the expectations were just way too high on Brent Venables. He should be a good head coach, but with Lincoln Riley leaving and all the players that left after Lincoln Riley left, that's hard. For anyone to come in, like I think a lot of people did and said, Oklahoma could probably win the Big 12 and they could do this and that. And I think that goes into the respect people have for Venables. And he's a very well-respected guy, but he's in a tough situation. He's going to be able to rebuild quick because it's Oklahoma. You can get players there, but it's really hard to rebuild that quickly in that short amount of time whenever Lincoln Riley just bolted and took basically probably the top 3 or 4 guys on top of guys who were committed to Oklahoma that they were expecting to come into the class. And those top guys decommitted and went elsewhere. So don't overreact on Oklahoma. They'll be back. I think Venables is going to be a great coach. But either way, when these two teams leave with the showing that we saw from, like we said, TCU, Kansas, and teams that we're going to talk about here in the rest of our recap, the future Big 12 is going to be really fun. No bad teams, really, it seems like. So I'm looking forward to that.
I'm with you. Yeah. And it's important to mention Dylan Gabriel, starting quarterback for Oklahoma, was out. So I'm not saying Oklahoma would have won, but they certainly wouldn't have lost by 49 points if they had their starter in there. But still, I don't think anyone's crying any tears for Oklahoma. But moving on to the 3:30 game from Saturday, Oklahoma State defeats Texas Tech in a hard-fought game. I really enjoyed watching this game, and I think it proves Oklahoma State is currently the team to beat in the Big 12. Even though they were playing from behind, they proved that they could win a game even when they aren't having their best day. And that's what all the best teams are able to do. Even when they're not firing on all cylinders, they can still emerge victorious. But I will say props to the Red Raiders, who, they've played well throughout this season, even though they've had to use 2 quarterbacks, but really they've used 3 at this point. They had Morton start the game for them, and he had a great first half, but got injured late in the second quarter. You could tell he wasn't 100% in the second half, so I'm sure that had a lot to do with the way Tech played. But regardless, Joey McGuire seems to have the Red Raiders trending in the right direction. Like I said, it was just a good game to watch between two competitive teams.
Yeah, I mean, again, another coach that's kind of rebuilding on the fly, and Joey McGuire was really lauded by a lot of people because they thought he was just the right guy to turn things around. Um, in Oklahoma State, they've been playing close games, but I think that, Mike Gundy as a coach is fantastic. Spencer Sanders, last year seemed to be a little turnover prone. Last time I checked, I think he only had one pick on the season. So he's kind of turned it around, and he's a dynamic player. And, while I think Oklahoma State's defense is nowhere near as good as it was last year, I still think it's solid enough. And I think that offense is dynamic enough to really run away with things. With Gundy as coach, I think he's kind of due for a conference championship. It's been a while since they've kind of been in that top spot. They were there last year, but Baylor was, took it all. So this is the year, and it'd be great to see a team like Oklahoma State make the college football playoff because, it's a different face than Lincoln Riley in Oklahoma. So, it's going to be fun. I'm happy for Oklahoma State and, Texas Tech, that again, that's a team on WVU's schedule that is going to have to be a win if we get to 6 wins. So it's going to be interesting to see, how the season progresses for WVU and how we approach that game here in a few weeks.
Yeah. Yeah, I would be perfectly fine in Oklahoma State making it to the college playoffs because, Oklahoma and Texas are Bolton. So, of course, no Big 12 fan should want them in the college playoffs. You want a team that's staying in the Big 12. So I would totally be fine with that. So the last game on Saturday was Kansas State defeats Iowa State 10-9. Not going to lie, I didn't get a chance to watch this game, but wow, defensive game. This Iowa State team seems to be dreadful offensively. Their defense has been great in conference play, so they're always in games, but their offense just can't win them a game this year, it seems like. Meanwhile, Kansas State is at the top of the Big 12, going 3-0 in conference play so far. Martinez has been great in Big 12 play, so that's going to be a tough matchup for WVU when we play Kansas State. They're an interesting team. So what are your thoughts on these two?
Yeah, I feel like Iowa State is kind of in a tough spot. They lost so much talent last year. I mean, how do you replace a player like Breece Hall? And Brock Purdy was just rock solid for them for 3 or 4 years. So, I mean, it's tough. But 9-10, that's a baseball score. I wasn't expecting a score that low. And that might be Iowa State's saving grace is their defense. That's one thing that Coach Campbell has always been kind of pretty solid at with his unique looking defenses, the way he brings pressure from all over, confuses offensive linemen. And like you said, Martinez has been great all year, but they held him to 10 points. So, that could be tough for WVU because our defense is bad. And if you could stop our offense, that could be a low scoring game. With Kansas State, I mean, a lot of people picked them as a dark horse to win the Big 12, and they're quietly, like you said, in first place. So it's going to be interesting to see, how they're going to face up against some of the more heavy hitters. I think they have the talent to do it, though. I mean, especially offensively, and I think their coach is really good. So, again, another quality Big 12 team. And right now, the Big 12 has half of its teams ranked. 5 of 10 teams are ranked in the top 25. So that's great for the Big 12. I really wish WVU could have been one of those teams, though.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right, so I mean, let's start breaking this matchup down. Let's talk about West Virginia's offense versus Baylor's defense. In my opinion, this is the key to the game to me. The Mountaineers' offense needs to get going early because West Virginia's defense just isn't good enough to allow a late comeback. We're just not built that way on defense. So to me, the Mountaineers just need to get an early lead. They can't afford to be trailing early like they did against Texas. That's just a recipe for disaster. And so hopefully we're front runners in the first half. Let's get the crowd going early and get some momentum. So how do you see WVU's offense matching up against Baylor's defense?
Looking at Baylor's defense, the thing about them that's different from last year is they don't have guy who is just a one-man wrecking crew. And last year that was Jalen Petrie, who's doing really well in the Houston Texans right now. And, I think last year he was a guy that we highlighted before the game, and he absolutely wrecked us. I think he had a pick. He was in our backfield all game. He was just all over the field. This year, Baylor's playing a little bit more as a unit. Run defense, they seem to be really, really good. 2.8 yards per rush they've allowed so far. But their secondary isn't that scary. Their best players are their safeties. Their corners aren't great. So I think this is an area where if WVU can withstand their defensive line, which again, they don't have one kind of stud. They just kind of work well as a unit. And they do have, I can't think of his name right now, that massive guy that gave us problems last year in the middle. That's good. We got to control him, but WVU is going to have to attack that secondary. Right now, the weakness seems to be deep downfield. Right now, so far on the season, teams have completed 7 of 10 passes for 214 yards and 2 touchdowns on throws longer than 20 yards downfield against Baylor secondary so far this season. So it's going to be interesting to see that matchup with Bryce Ford Wheaton going downfield, Caden Prather going downfield, if they can win those one-on-ones, if they can get separation against these cornerbacks, because it's those matchups they should win. But are they going to? We'll see.
Yeah. I mean, Baylor does have a stingy run defense. They're only allowing 96 rushing yards a game. And, the Mountaineers need Tony Mathis and Justin Johnson to get their run game going. They can't make JT Daniels be the entire offense like we saw against Texas. He's going to need some help. So the offensive line needs to be physical, open up some of those lanes, because we didn't see that at all versus Texas. And honestly, I thought we'd see a little bit of Jalen Anderson since CJ Donaldson's out, but I was listening to Neil Brown's press conference today, and he basically alluded to it's going to be just Justin and Tony taking on all the carries. And he said, if one of those two guys get banged up, we do have Jalen as our third running back. So it sounds like it's all on those two, but obviously the line needs to be physical and help them out. But you did mention Baylor. They're the type of team who likes to drop 2 safeties back. It seems like their front normally takes care of the run game. And so burning them can be difficult. But you mentioned teams are 7 for 10 when they do take those chances. And I think the big key is to having early success running the ball, moving the chains by dinking and dunking, and then having those safeties start to cheat up a little bit to stop that short and intermediate game. So I think that's going to be a big factor if the Mountaineers want to have success Thursday. They need to be successful running the ball and getting those short and intermediate passes going early.
Yeah, and running the ball, looking at Baylor's defense, it's kind of hard to figure out where best to attack them, because they have a cornerback, and their safeties are both really good in the run game. So they do drop back, fill in really well tackles. So originally I was thinking, maybe we should try some more stretch runs, get outside those big physical defensive linemen. But with those safeties who come in and fill so quickly, that might not be the answer. So it's really going to, like you said, maybe with Mike O'Laughlin out, that's huge. Brian Polanday hasn't been a great lead blocker. So, how are we going to get going in the middle? Because you really need that extra guy in there to go out there and clear out that extra lane. Because even if you're going to get 3 yards, that's over what Baylor typically allows per rush. So I'm interested to see what Graham Harrell draws up to figure out how to get past that really stingy Baylor rush defense.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what they draw up early on, because as we mentioned last week, I was not impressed with the scripted plays to start the Texas game, going 8 passes in the first 9 plays. I think if they try doing that again this week, it's just going to lead to a lot of early punts and maybe being down early.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're definitely gonna have to try to get those safeties to come down a little bit, and to do that, you need to run. You need to hit your short passing game, whether it's screens, hitting running backs in the flats, which we haven't really done all season. I've been trying to figure out where you're best going to be able to run. I feel like the strong side of our offensive line is that right side with Doug Nestor and Jordan White, if he's able to play. So maybe trying to, you don't want to tip your hand too much, but try to run a little bit heavier to that side, because that side has been a little bit better at creating push, creating gaps. And so, it's going to be interesting to see. I'm really looking for kind of the X factor on offense this week to be, again, kind of Bryce Ford Wheaton. That's who I would kind of pin it on, because while he started off really, really hot the first few weeks, he's kind of cooled off the past couple weeks, and Caden Prather has kind of taken the driver's seat. So Bryce Ford Wheaton could really have a big game this week if he's able to kind of bounce back from the past few weeks he's had.
Yeah, and the biggest thing will be getting separation. I don't know why, but Bryce Ford Wheaton has just really struggled to get separation from his defender, because for a while there, he was leading the nation in contested catches, which is awesome. But that also means you're being draped a lot, which means you're not getting away from your guy. So on one hand, it's a good thing, but on the other hand, it's a little concerning.
Yeah. A lot of the catches he's making too, if you look at kind of where he's been best, is those little slants and stop routes. Those kind of seem to be staples of Graham Harrell's offense, which I can't complain about. It works. So those are routes that's a little bit harder to get separation on. But even when he gets vertical, like you said, I mean, even those are contested catches. So I don't know if it's his route running. And, I don't doubt his athleticism, because I feel like he's really, really athletic. So I'm not sure if he has a tell, but I feel like this is a game that he could potentially be the player of the game type player. A couple touchdowns, over 100 yards. I think this is the game to do it, if he were to do it and get back on track.
Yeah. Here's hoping. So all this leads us to West Virginia's defense versus Baylor's offense. Blake Shapen had some rough games in non-conference play, but he's been really good in conference play. He's really found his stride, it seems like, against Iowa State and Oklahoma State. In those two games alone, he has nearly 600 passing yards and 5 touchdowns. So I think a big reason for his performance against the Cowboys is he's got his speed weapon back in Baldwin. The wide receiver seems to be healthy again. That's bad news for West Virginia, because he's a heck of a wide receiver with dangerous speed. So how can WVU slow down Shapen to Baldwin? Because I think that's going to be a big factor this game.
They need to force him to throw outside the hashes. It seems like, just looking at his numbers, that he really prefers to throw in between the hashes. He loves to throw down the middle. Listen to these numbers and you'll kind of get the picture. So if we look at in between the numbers, 20 plus yards, he has 9 attempts, 5 completions, 10 plus yards, 18 for 29. Anything past the line of scrimmage, 36 for 41. Behind the line of scrimmage, 9. That's all in the middle. But if you look down the left side, 4 attempts, 3 attempts, 5 attempts, 5 attempts. The right, 2 attempts, 5 attempts, 15 attempts, 7 attempts. He loves throwing to the middle of the field. So try to make him uncomfortable. Try to take away that middle. It's going to be interesting to see how WVU chooses to employ that. But I think, we have some good players in the middle. I mean, Kopcha, Lowe, Aubrey Burks, those are probably our best, guys at the second level. They're obviously not world beaters, but it's not our cornerbacks. So I'm really hoping that we're able to kind of funnel things outside. And hopefully our cornerbacks can be solid enough to not get beat and make Blake Shapen's numbers on the outside look better.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder if that has anything to do with arm strength, because typically quarterbacks who don't have strong arms, are afraid to throw outside those hash marks.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't think of that, but that's a very good possibility.
Yeah, I guess I haven't really watched Baylor enough to really know. But another guy to look for in their passing game is tight end Ben Sims. He's not a guy who gets a ton of yards, but he leads Baylor in receptions. And, good tight ends seem to have big days against the Mountaineers. It seems like for decades, that's always been our issue. So I could see our secondary getting a little too worried about Baylor's speed on the outside. And Sims having some big plays down the middle, as you just alluded to. That's where Shapen likes to look anyway. So, as always, the key will be to pressure Shapen, disrupt his timing, and just force him to do things he's not comfortable doing. So we'll see if the Mountaineers can do that on Thursday night. Here's another interesting thing I heard in Neil Brown's press conference. He says Charles Woods is out at least another week. So I'm not sure how to read into that. I don't know if that means he can possibly come back after the Baylor game, or if he's just playing it safe and saying that, he's definitely going to be out Baylor and we'll just reassess it then.
That's a good question. I'm not sure. I'd love to have him back, but another thing that I really wish Neil would have taken the time to do is, get some of these young guys more reps while he was out. So that way we have a better idea of who's going to be starting across from him. Obviously, I don't want to rush Charles Woods back, especially where the season's at. I mean, he would make a difference, but I don't know how much of a difference he would make when the rest of our secondary has just been atrocious. One guy can help, but I don't think they can single-handedly win things. So it's going to be interesting. Another key that, I kind of wanted to focus on too for against Baylor is pressuring Chapin, like you said. When he's not pressured, he's completing 77% of his passes for 952 yards and 7 touchdowns. But when he's been under pressure, he's only completing 42% of his passes, 166 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick. So that was below my screenshot. So kind of forgot to mention that. So I wanted to throw that in for the listeners to make sure they understand that, Blake Chapin is immortal, and there's a couple ways that you can take advantage of him.
Yeah, that's good stuff. I mean, that tells us if we can just get in his face, force him to throw outside, we could really have some success in their passing game. But that brings us all to what Baylor does best. Baylor's strength on offense is their offensive line. They're big, they're physical, and they proved that to us last season when they pushed WVU's defensive line in any direction they wanted. So the Baylor's run game averages 187 yards per game, led by running back Richard Reese. So getting the run game going is always their primary goal. And, how do you think WVU's defensive front can slow them down?
I mean, I think that our defensive front is our best weapon, but I'm interested to see how we kind of approach their attack because, we saw against Pitt where we were running more of a 4-man front, and that seemed to work pretty well against a Pitt team that really wanted to run the ball against us. Against Virginia Tech, we did that 5-man front with the 1 linebacker, and that seemed to eliminate their rushing threat. I wonder if we would employ a situation because obviously you have to worry about Baldwin. You have to worry about Chapin. You also have to control that running game because that's kind of what they want to build things off of. And their offensive line is really good. Jacob Gall is one of the top centers in the country. He has the 6th best pass blocking grade, 3rd best run blocking grade in the nation. He's ranked top 25 in both of those stats as well, regardless of offensive line position. Micah Mazuka, I'm probably butchered that, but he's their left guard. He has the 3rd highest run blocking grade in the nation for a guard. And their rest of their offensive line, none of them are slouches. Really, the only weak spot is Connor Galvin, their left tackle, and he's only bad at pass protection. He's allowed 9 pressures and 4 sacks so far this season. But the running backs are good. I mean, like you said, Richard Reese, he's forced 17 missed tackles, so WVU is going to have to wrap up, and that's something that the secondary has had trouble doing. He has 6 rushes for over 15 yards this year. He loves running to that left side of the offensive line where he's averaging 5.8 yards per carry. The one thing that really stood out to me was how small some of Baylor's best players are. You mentioned Richard Reese. He's 5'9", 175 pounds. Craig Williams, their backup, 5'9", 168 pounds. Baldwin is 5'9", 164 pounds. So, I mean, these are really small guys. So I think WVU could really, if you can grab a hold of them, you can bring them down. I'm really hoping that they can take advantage of their lack of size and physicality and, corral them. But at the same time, Deuce Vaughn last year from Kansas State shredded us, and he's smaller than all 3 of those guys. So it's not just about the size, it's about how they use them. So
That's right. Yeah, and Baylor likes to run a lot of stretch plays in their running game. So as you were saying, taking good angles and not missing tackles is going to be the key to the game. So hopefully they clean up those missed tackles that they had against Texas, because if they do that against Baylor, they're just going to control the clock, and it's not going to be a pretty day for us. So, the only other thing I have left is I know we don't have a lot of returning starters on defense, but I hope guys like Dante Stills and guys who played in that game last year can use that as motivation. And because, we got absolutely manhandled on offense and defense last year against Baylor. And so we're at home. It's Thursday night. I just hope they have that in the back of their mind because that can be a very motivating thing heading into a game.
Yeah, for sure. And this is obviously that Texas game has to be sitting in the back of their mind for just how bad they kind of came out and played all around. I'm really hoping that similar to what Texas had after that Texas Tech loss, that bounce back, that kind of reinvigoration of energy, WVU can kind of mimic and come out with some energy and feel like they're fighting for something, because that's also going to be telling on how they feel about Neil Brown. Is the team going to step up for him, or are they going to kind of slip and give up? It's going to be interesting to watch the body language, the energy, especially on a Thursday night in front of all the fans in Morgantown, how the team comes out. And it could be a really good indication of the direction of the program, and how the players feel about where we're at too.
Yeah, that's a good point. If you lose the locker room, there's really not a whole lot of places you can go except out the door. So we'll see. The last thing we got is, something that was big news a few days ago. Tailgaters in the blue lot apparently can't tailgate until 5:00 due to hospital employees and visitors needing those parking spaces at the hospital.
Ridiculous.
Yeah, apparently this has always been the rule. We just haven't had a Thursday night game in a while. But my God, you would think, this was the worst news ever because tailgaters were losing their mind. We're not blue lot guys. We're over in the silver lot. So I suppose if you pay good money for that pass, you want to be able to use it early, party a little bit. But come on, man, what are we doing? Are we really saying a bunch of drunks need the spot more than hospital employees? Like, you guys still can park and drink for 2 hours. And if you need to do more than that, go somewhere else and party a little bit before you go to the parking lot. Like, I don't know what to tell you. I can't believe that this made so much noise.
How dare you save lives when there's beer to be drank?
I get it. It's not like we're above it. We like getting there early and putting a few back too, but geez Louise, there were so many people up in arms online. What's that?
I'm all for the doctors. I'm being sarcastic, guys. I'm all for the doctors. So don't think that I'm supporting the people who want to be gross and porta johns.
We just wanted to bring that up, guys, because we thought it was kind of a funny story. But that's all we got for this week. We'll be at the game. We'll be rooting on our Mountaineers. So if anyone has tickets, if anyone's a season ticket holder, we encourage you, try to do your best to get there. Support the Mountaineers. I know some people are saying attendance might be as low as high 40,000s. I really hope fans turn out for these players. And even if you don't like the way the direction the program's going, you got to go out there and support your team. Don't be fair weather.
Yeah. And if you don't want to go to see the game, you can come to see us, just shoot us a message. We'll do some autographs. We'll sign pictures,
Yeah.
We're kind of a big deal, right?
Yeah. We're modest. So we're not too big for our fans. All right, guys, that's it for us. We really appreciate you listening. We'll do a recap on this, I don't know, sometime over the weekend or sometime next week. Hopefully we're talking about a big win for Neil Brown and our Mountaineers. So until then, we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.